let me offer a reflection to start off the debate, if I may. Ian, if you'll permit me, I see here a magnificent illustration of the problem of self-organizing systems in a hierarchical world with institutions, governments, and universities. The first part of this slide talks about how to create interdisciplinary teams to do networking and so forth. And then we discover that a critical friend is going to be assigned to monitor something, and that money is what makes it all happen. It's the fertilizer. So this is very good food for thought here. I think our goal here this morning is not to talk too much about the concepts or the definitions, even though they will drive processes, but rather talk about networking and what we can learn from our different experiences. So I think both Simon and Ian have provided a lot of thought already with these two examples, and I wonder if anyone has some questions for them or comments about this core issue of our session. Yes, please.
Yes, I have two questions to Ian. First of all, the UK ecosystem assessment. Maybe I've missed it, but have you also analyzed the ecosystem integrity of different ecosystem types in the UK for the long-term provision of these ecosystem services? Second question, participation for valuation and decision-making has been a long-term demand already at the Rio conference, Agenda 21, but also in the recently developed Millennium Ecosystem Assessment Manual for assessment practitioners. And they see ecosystem assessments more as an interactive exchange between the people concerned, experts, decision makers, and the UK ecosystem assessment seems to be based on people in positions, decision makers, experts, but not the wider public concern. Why have you followed this way? Because also, so it's a longer question, because a lot of values, especially the non-use values, cannot be assessed without the people concerned.
Okay. First of all, on the first one, the sustainability. So I think there's some very interesting aspects to how the NEA was originally set up and then subsequently run. I was asked to go to this meeting at what I thought was the start of the process, to find out that I was the economist on it, and they'd already hired 300 natural scientists. And I think that was quite revealing. And if you actually read the ecosystem assessment, you'll find that the vast majority of it, I think there's something like 22 chapters, right? And 18 at least of them are natural science. And they are focused on looking at what has happened to ecosystem services from 1945 to the present day, and then what's the forecast from the present day to 2060. And all of that is in natural science terms. The focus is very much on sustainability, trying to assess whether these trends are going to, or have already breached any sort of threshold. So I think it's done a fairly good job of that. What I won't even pretend is that we have attempted to value the stocks, okay? Because, well, a variety of reasons. One, I personally think that economics breaks down if you try and value stocks. What is the value of the stock of drinking water in Britain? Well, without it, we're dead. So, how do you put any value on that for infinity? And infinity isn't going to be of any use to any decision maker. So the only relevant values are looking at the values that come from feasible changes. What change would happen if you did this policy or that policy? that's a useful piece of economic information. Coming up with values that say that the value of all carbon storage in Britain is, one group came up with this, is something like $150 trillion. In other words, I don't know how many multiples of annual GDP is pointless. Because actually that carbon, 90-something% of it is going to stay there all the time. So it's not a useful piece of information. What's useful is these change values. With regard to you said about participation and that sort of stuff. Well, these values were not dreamed up by me. They are based on, as much as possible, on observed human behaviour. So, for example, probably the easiest way to illustrate is we look at recreation values associated with ecosystems and variation in ecosystem quality. How was that assessed? We look at where people start recreational trips, where they end recreational trips, and Britain's got a fantastic database for exactly that. And you see, is there any association whatsoever with the type of environment that they're visiting and the quality of that environment? Or is it that actually all British people want to do is go and sit in a pub and they don't care if the river next to it is stagnant or pristine? And lo and behold, you find that when you do look at behaviour, it is correlated to environmental quality. And actually, people are prepared to put more costs on themselves to get to higher quality environments. Therefore, you can use their values, not my values. So I think we've tried the right methodology. I'm absolutely sure you could criticise almost any number in there, but I personally think the methodology is defensive. I have a feeling others will disagree.
Great, but let's keep to our theme, please. Yes.
You mentioned that you started with the different disciplines in their own comfort zone.
Yes.
I think once you start building interdisciplinary teams, there's always the need to clarify terms. Because just, for example, sustainability, you talk to social scientists or natural scientists, you have totally different times frame that you're talking about. How did you deal with that? When you brought these different science disciplines together in the sectors, did you specifically deal with that in a certain way?
Yeah, I mean, that's why fantastic, that's exactly the slide I wanted up, thank you. We realised that we were going to waste a lot of time if we didn't come up with some common language that people could perhaps reluctantly, first of all, understand, and maybe more reluctantly, tolerate. Yeah, and that was helped greatly by the fact that this was a major exercise that was undertaken at the start of the NEA. So we already had a good sort of 6 months' work to draw on with regard to this conceptual framework of definitions, stocks, flows. What do we mean by initially ecosystem services and then environmental services? What do we mean by goods? That was interesting, and we did come to a consensus, and a tolerated consensus.
Yeah, one thing that I'm particularly interested in, and I'm curious to hear Josh's opinion, you emphasized environmental services could be more inclusive for the geophysical scientists as compared to the term ecosystem services. Both terms are used more or less interchangeably, but they have very different meanings. So it is a good example of the importance to agree on terms. Josh, what do you have to say about that or anything else?
About that, actually, different countries use it in different ways. For example, Brazil, an environmental service is services that humans provide in terms of when we manage the ecosystem, we provide environmental services. Ecosystem services are the services that ecosystems provide without human intervention. But it's different definitions everywhere. I like ecosystem because it emphasizes there's a whole system involved. but the vocabulary is always tough. The question I have for both the presenters is that maybe I'm off base here, but I always think we actually have enough science to know we're in deep shit. We've really got to solve the problem. And the issue is not getting better science, getting better values, it's communicating what we do know to the people and the decision makers in a way that gets them to act. But the challenge is they're complex ideas and difficult to communicate. And you know, that's what I would love to have insights into how to do, and what you learn and you point out, you know, in your thing, that you got to put it in a language that's not academic, that's not jargony, and to figure that out. And then just super quick, a comment on values, just a comment. You showed that as the flow of as the flow of services went down, you showed the value going down. Perversely, GMP does the opposite. If something's really important and there's less of it, the value goes up, including the value of the stock. So when food supplies diminished in 2007, grain supplies, the value tripled. So it's a 5% less quantity and the tripling of value. Same with fossil fuels. I mean, anytime something's essential, non-substitutable is inelastic demand for the economist. A decrease in supply leads to an increase in marginal value and an increase in total value.
Well, it might or it might not.
No, absolutely does. Inelastic demand is essential, and that's the definition of inelastic demand. Essential, non-substitutable, a decrease in quantities, increase in total revenue or total value. By definition.
Marginal value, where we go wrong.
And total value, by definition, it has inelastic demand. We can talk about it later if we want that.
Let's leave that to later.
It's a definitional thing, actually.
Good, so we're in deep shit.
And how do we communicate that?
How do we
back to the
communicate across boundaries and silos? Yes, please, Simon.
Okay. I wanted to just give an example, and this is a bit silly, but what we've been doing in South East Queensland, and these workshops that I run that are completely interdisciplinary, and people, most of them don't understand ecosystem services or have any background in it. And you are putting planners in the same room with economists and with environmental scientists. And even in this workshop that I held on the national scale, we always warn people, you know, of their use of technical terms, that other people in the room, you know, aren't necessarily going to understand the language that they're talking about. But in South East Queensland, when we were running through all these workshops the last 5 years, we were actually trying to develop a language, a common language. That was the whole aim of the framework, to actually define and classify these ecosystem services. And we look at it from ecosystems, functions, services to well-being, and get these people to develop their own language. So the idea was those people that were going to apply the tools were going to develop their own tools. It wasn't us developing them in-house and then taking them out for review. It was, I mean, there's two ways you can do this. You can do that as an organisation. You can take your tool back out and go, hey, I've got a great tool, wouldn't you like to use it? Or you can get those end users to develop their own tools. So they developed their own language. But we had to take some of the angst out of the workshops because they were getting really frustrating, you know, talking across these languages. So we started playing this little game, and anytime anyone started talking too technical, well, if people were getting lost in it, they had to look up and go. And so in the middle of these workshops, you'd see like 10 people start going like this, and then the person talking had to start, you know, putting it in a language they could understand. So there was ways to work around it, but the idea was to get these people to develop their own language. And I think that's what is important at the end of the day. If you want to mainstream ecosystem services and get business and industry and governments and community, you need to get these people all in the room to develop the language that they can understand and communicate trade-offs and all these sorts of things together, rather than, you know. Yeah.
Could you give us an example how this language differs from the concept of language we use?
Well, some of them were very quite simple. You know, what the term value, for example, the way an ecologist uses the term value is different to the way an economist uses the term value. So we were really careful about when we're talking value, just to be able to, you know, state what we were meaning rather than just talking about the value of an ecosystem. Because, you know, depending on who you were, you would just see things different. So that was a big one, just getting over that term. But there was a whole range of other terms as well, but actually defining what's a function versus a service, because that was also a different conflict across the disciplines, so they need to be very specific about those terms and what they were doing. But following on from what you're saying about the environmental services, when we're doing this, we ran around the community, ran around Brisbane City with a video camera, asking people what they understand by the term ecosystem services. and they were actually saying with these ecosystem services that they thought it was services that we provided to ecosystems. And that was a very common thing that we got across there. And we followed Matt Zylstra's project about what's nature done for you today, and what have you done for nature today, and then asked him about ecosystem services. So
let's go on. There were a few other people, but we need to wrap up this discussion. So please keep it to this topic. If there's anything new to add right now. Okay, please.
Yeah, I just have a question because what strikes me in many of the presentations and many of the discussions in the conference is about standardization. So on the one hand, the ecosystem services community seems to be very obsessed with standardizing definitions, standardizing monitoring. On the other hand, you have these local initiatives where they create their own measures, as you were talking about. How do these two connect? And what exactly does capacity building mean in this respect? Because when you read the IPA's documents about capacity building, it's about disciplining, making people measure the same in different places. And I think if you want to go for participation and engagement, this is very, well, I'm going to say it bluntly, this is very detrimental.
Very good point.
I work for the city of Amsterdam, and I'm participating in a group that's called Farming the Cities. It shows initiatives on the website where local people start to make moestuintjes in what's the gardens? Allotment gardens in their own neighborhood, and then we talk about what it provides for them, and then you talk about could it be provided, why do you choose to do this in your local neighborhood? But the message is that you connect with the people and then make a policy of it, and then give them money.
Right.
So to turn it around.
I have a nice example from the Western United States. I met a woman who's an artist, and she teams up with ecologists, in this case a hydrologist and a aquatic system ecologist, and they designed a water treatment plant for the city of someplace in North Dakota. And the local community worked on it together, not just for the ecology, but the aesthetics.
Yeah.
And they made something absolutely beautiful. So it was not just about terms, but also aesthetics. Artists have a different understanding of value as well, completely different than ecologists or economists, that may be closer to community. The other thing that I think is very important, as Bob Costanza said, he used the word social capital. How do you restore social capital along with natural capital?
But it's back to networking.
Right?
What you should do is not only be involved in science, but also in the local network, your own neighbor. Tell him about what you're doing and what he can do or she can do, and tell him to make a focus. What would you like to be able to do in 2020? Would you like to have your own? Then the ideas come and the circle. That's networking.
I strongly agree with that. The reason why we didn't go straight to that is that it's this initial phase. We've only got 1 million at the moment, and we thought we'll try and get to a point where at least the science community is showing a united front and has decision makers involved in it, and then go out to the wider community in the second round. But I think you're right, ultimately that's what you should do.
I suggest that we